Well, I asked some Niners for some questions.
Niners, that's what you
Yeah,
call
that's
your
what we
guys?
call 'em.
I didn't know that.
And
Niners.
I really don't want to, I didn't want to do like the slash dot thing. So because I asked, I should ask a couple of them.
No,
And
it's
it's
good.
different because we're not on the phone, we're on channel 9, we're on a camera, tablet, right on.
It's all good.
All right. So let's see here.
Niners.
The Niners. We got a lot of good Niners. How does Microsoft's, this is asked by Niner Manet, it's been around for a while. How does Microsoft's recent move to release some projects via SourceForge help or hinder your efforts to dispel the alleged benefits of the OSS model? So we are putting stuff on
Yeah.
SourceForge.
No, this goes back to the earlier conversation I had. It says, hey, and one thing that I struggle with, I've had this job for about 18 months now, and is that we're not anti-open source. There's this, some of it's our own doing, but whatever the case is, people think that we're anti-open source. We're not anti-open source, as I said. It's a development model. It's a way to write software. There's a lot of issues and things that make up what is open source in some ways. And so, I think by us putting the, Flex Wiki and by the stuff that we did to put out there, on SourceForge, is just a statement that says, hey, you know what, we think that there are reasons why someone might open source something, and take a company like Microsoft. Why would any commercial software company open source something? And, this is kind of how I view the world. One, it's a technology that, you're going to end of life, but you've got customers using it, and so you want to make sure that there's a community-based way to continue to support those customers, and so you'll open source something. Two, you'll open source something because it's something where you haven't gotten the market penetration you want, but you just don't want to kill the technology. And so in some ways it's to get it out there to try to get more program model ubiquity or some level of connection around it. Like maybe what CA did with Ingress could be an example where, you had Oracle, you had SQL, you had, a bunch of databases and Ingress just wasn't going to, get over the hump. So let's just open source it and see if we can get more customers and more users by it being, out there at that level in some ways. That's the reason why a commercial software company might. Three, it's something that's really not, in this case, mainstream in terms of a core central part of, your roadmap and your technical strategy. But, it's good technology that people might be able to benefit from. And that's kind of what we did, with the projects that we put out there. Was, and it was interesting to kind of see how people took them on and how they did things with those projects. And so, I think the Uber statement is, hey, we're not anti-open source, and this is a proof positive that we've taken some of our stuff and put it out there.
Totally. And excellent. So let's see here. What else do we have? That's we haven't already talked about.
Niners. I like the Niners.
I think we talked about what Sparky asked. What's the most common reason in your experience do people go for Linux? Because it's not Microsoft? Is it because there's some inherent value in being an open source operating system?
So I think you have to cut it up by who. And so maybe let me give you a view from your traditional corporate IT professional commercial environment, and maybe Bill can give some insight to kind of the developer community, hobbyist, enthusiast, program, because I think there's slightly different audiences and their attraction to Linux might be driven in slightly different ways. From a corporate perspective, many people have a perception that, you'll have better total cost of ownership, it's more reliable, and better security. Those seem to be the three biggest things that have people, consider and even use Linux in place of Windows in some ways. Now, some of the work that we're doing is to try to help people say, hey, let's not just part and parcel believe that you get better TCO or you're more reliable or you're more secure with Linux just because. Let's really go to have a better analysis. Now, you might end up after your analysis saying, hey, wow, we do get better TCO, than Microsoft or than Windows on Linux, or you might not, and hopefully that will then drive the decision. But it definitely was a very perception-fueled driven decision where people were taking either freely available or free when there really weren't pricing models around it, translating that all the way through to total cost of ownership, and then looking to deploy it. Or they had an NT4 box running, it was blowing up on them a lot. They were having to reboot it because of memory leaks or whatever. They had they deployed maybe a Linux box as a firewall or a small web server, and they weren't having to patch it. It wasn't going down. So they kind of had some apples and oranges on the reliability aspect, from that perspective. And so So you had a lot of that perception-fueled things that were going on that were driving some of the corporate decision-making. And I think that we've tried to help balance some of that. Sure, was there some just disdain for Microsoft that was causing some of it? Yeah, to some degree. At the end of the day, you know, a corporate CIO is not going to take a broad platform decision just because he's angry with us. I mean, or just because we've upset him or her. I mean, it really needs to be more of a technical direction from that perspective.
True.
I don't know if you want to comment kind of from
Yeah, I think most people who, just kind of taking Microsoft out of it, because the question was, why are people attracted to Linux, not necessarily why they choose Windows.
True.
I would say, in my experience, it's mainly because it looked and smelled a lot like Unix to most people, right? And they were able to for myself, coming from a Unix background, it was the most familiar thing for me when looking at alternate platforms, right? And you know, one thing that we see just across the globe is this big move to x86, right? And people are at this sort of Linux or Windows decision point as they move to an x86 platform. So there was a lingua franca there that people understood. Mm-hmm. You guys have interviewed Jeffrey Snover from the Monad team,
yes,
right? And I spent a lot of time with the Monad team because, as Martin likes to say, before I joined Microsoft, I didn't know how to use a mouse because I spent so much time at the command line. And today with Monad, which is our next generation shell and scripting environment, for example, my boxes and my XP boxes, they look just like a Linux command line, right? I can type PS and get my processes. I can type it to sort. I can do all the things I'm familiar with doing. Because we're learning that what was attracted to people going to Linux was this familiarity. I didn't have to type dir, I could type ls and get my directory listing, right? That was, I didn't know how to type dir, right? I still really don't. So to make that language barrier a little bit, the semantics a little more familiar with people coming from Unix space, now we have these things like Monad. The other side of it is just the fact that people had very, very quick and easy access. So I think a lot of, from an enthusiast or hobbyist perspective, the ability to go and just download whatever you need and be up and running in 10 minutes with your own system that you can tinker with was very attractive to a lot of people, right? If you look back at how Linus got involved with Linux, he got involved from a similar model, a very simple, easy to access operating system called Minix, right, that he could tinker with and thus begat Linux, right? So that same sort of academic curiosity, technical curiosity, if I just want to get something and play with it and make it malleable very quickly, is how a lot of the hobbyists get involved with Linux today.
True. And like, for example, Google, they're, just to use it as an example, as a big company that adopted it, is because they actually wanted to create a custom OS to do a highly specialized thing.
Yeah, when I talked about those fringes, right, I mean, people have asked me before, hey, when do you think you guys can go win Google? I said, maybe never, competitive issues aside around MSN search, just, in terms of just platform aside, hey, they've hired a bunch of, very expensive, very intelligent, very well-trained, guys who want to tune that thing to run a very specific function, a very specific purpose. But Windows is a multi-purpose, multi-function operating system that's going to appeal to getting that big sweet spot, but you won't be able to tune it and tweak it to be optimal for what you want to do on Google search in some ways. Now, we had the same challenge in other types of high performance computing scenarios now, and we've got a product coming out, the Compute Cluster Edition, that will in some ways provide us an ability to engage with some of those audiences. But even then, I think there's still going to be those fringe areas where they're going to want to do something so specialized that you really just have to be able to have that level of source access, to do it that way. And then that's where I go back to the point that, when I sit down, and if I was to sit down to the Google R&D team right now, and they were to pitch me their idea on how they want to run Google, I struggle to make sure to say, hey, here's how Windows is perfect for you, on the way that they want to go do it. I try to give it a run, but I'm not sure if they would.
But more importantly, at that point, it's not a Linux thing.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. That's a very good point.
I talk with those fringe people all the time, right? People in technical and scientific computing who have a specific need to, let's say, rewrite the CPU schedule, right? Most customers don't need to do that, right? But certain people do. And at that point, it's not so much, oh, it's a Linux thing that allows me to do it. You can use any of the BSDs that have been around. You can write your own operating system, right? If it's really, many customers do write their own operating systems. So it's I try to take Windows and Linux out of
Good
it,
point.
right? What are you trying to do? What's your business? My business is rerunning CPU schedulers, or I need to put an operating system in a device, and I need that level of control. And then working around, okay, Linux is a choice, BSD is a choice, you know, all these other things. Maybe Windows CE is a choice, because you can be malleable right now with Windows CE. So that's what, I mean, when people ask us, you know, our position, that's why I mean there's not so much polarity, right? Because it's really what you're trying to do with it, not so much your philosophical religious belief around Windows or Linux.
True. That's a great point. Fantastic point. Let's see, do we have anything here that's, why isn't Microsoft lowering prices on their products? I have to throw that
Who
one.
asked that one?
That was Zippy V.
Zippy V.
Zippy V from Belgium.
Zippy V from Belgium. No, I mean, it's actually interesting because, or I'd say it a few different ways. One, people like to make it a price conversation, and on a variety of fronts, especially comparing, you know, Microsoft versus Linux in some ways. And, you know, I would say that it's less of that and more of, do we have the right product for the right segment at the right offering type scenario. Let's take something like small business server. Right? I could have taken, or we could have taken, Windows and Exchange and, you know, SQL and the premium, you know, taking all the products that make up, you know, small business server, duct tape them together, cut the price by 85%, and I can guarantee you we would not have the pickup that we have today on small business server, because we designed a server product that had those integrated functions of store and forward and collaboration, mail, data, you know, all those stuff that we have in those products, but we really designed it for, you know, that segment of the user the right way for something called small business server. And so a lot of times people, they want to make it a pricing conversation, and it's really a usage scenario. You know, are we using the thing the right way for the right person type scenario? I mean, hopefully Skippy V's seen that we've added value to the products that we put into the marketplace on a comparative level. And so taking a look at what you can do on the client side with Windows XP versus, you know, any other products for that matter, you know, hopefully we see the value. And that's our job, is to show the value of the stuff that we deliver to the marketplace. But, you know, and we'll continue on that path.
Absolutely. Well, smart, and just as a side note, I mean, small business server is doing great.
Right.
People love it. So
Yeah, one thing I always laugh about is people ask me about, you know, what is the Microsoft has that doesn't exist in the open source space? And every morning when I drive in this building, there's a bunch of parking spots that I can't park in that say UX parking only. And for non-Microsoft POSIMs, for user experience parking only. These are people who come in, customers or user experience specialists. We have a whole fleet of people around here who are specialists in UI to make sure that every time you click file open, it looks file open on all the apps, right? Consistency, make sure the fonts render correctly, that whole side of it. That and our program management side, which Bill says we need to build a product for the small business user, not just stick stuff together and price it down, right? Starter edition's the same way, right? So building a specific product and delivering it in a certain way is a huge part of the Microsoft software machine. Those parking spots for people focused on user experience are very important, right? They're very important spots to have because it's an element of our model that we then charge money for for commercial software to pay off that investment.
I mean, and even going all the way out, and, you know, we've got people called ethnographers that really look at language usage and dialogue boxes and what's the right way to structure, you know, phrases in different languages so we're not offending people. I mean, we try, you know, we round out our applications. We round them out to do those types of things, you know, in a way that you just won't see at that level, because that's interesting work that you've got to kind of pay someone to go do. And so hopefully our model of extracting value for the software that we deliver and then making investments in ethnographers and user experience people and all these other things to make your experience better, you know, that model continues in some ways.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're running out of time. This has been really nice. I appreciate you talking.
No, this has been good. Skippy, V, Beers 24,
Beer 28.
Beer 28.
Go Niners.
You know,
Sparky.
I forgot Sparky. We'll continue to have some good dialogue.
Yep. There's some other ones here that were good, but we couldn't get to.
Okay.
We're running out of tape. I'm assuming that's why you went like this to me.
I would say if we're going to do our tour, we should
Yeah, the
probably
thing I
use
do, I want you guys, you should go, I mean, it's nothing sexy, it's just a lab full of servers, but, you know.
But it's a lab full of servers running Linux.
Actually, I'll take that back. Somebody, one of the Niners might actually think that thing is sexy.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, well, you should actually, maybe Bill should take you over and show you the lab a little bit.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Thank you.
Well, hey,
really
good to meet you.
appreciate it. Nice
All
to
right?
meet you, too.
And go Niners. All right.
All right. So where are we going now, Bill?
So we're going to go to the Linux labs.
Linux Labs.
right down around the corner.
Okay. So we do have Linux Labs at Microsoft. I don't know.
We used to have.
I wonder if we run Linux in
Yeah,
there.
let me see who my guys are in. Pop in and say hi to them. Hey guys, say hi to Channel 9. This is Aitan and Jeremy. These are a couple guys in my team. These are good old-fashioned Linux hackers working for me.
Right.
Jeremy does some work on the Linux from Scratch project, and Aitan just joined us recently as well. We're going to take him into the lab right now. Channel 9, channel9.msdn.com.
Nice to meet you guys. They're busy hacking away.
Busy hacking away.
So you actually recruit Linux developers.
Well, yeah. So I have a team of guys that work for me that come from not just Linux developers, but really people from the open source community. Right? So people who've been developers in the open source space who come in and help us, do the analysis. And having been in the space quite a while, I know a lot of these guys from my past, and to have a conversation with our product teams around how open source works, it comes best from people who actually speak to it, not just had read a website. Right? So we've been swimming in it for a while.
Excellent.
So this is our lab.
Let me pause here real quick.
Okay.
I really need to speak up again.
Okay,
So, you know.
got it.
Okay.
So start again.
Okay. This is our lab, and it's a collection of servers and desktops we run. It's Linux and Unix and Windows. I'm going to show you a couple things if we have them up and running. Here's an example. So one of the things we do that I mentioned a minute ago, yikes, we're really beating up this machine right now. So Martin mentioned earlier that we work a lot with product teams on different types of analysis, and what we're doing on this one is working with our Windows Server high-performance computing team to help them understand what a Linux cluster looks like. So when we take a product into the market, we know what are customers looking for, right?
Okay.
So what are customers running Linux clusters today to do, and then how would we compare to take a product into the market?
Can I ask you a question? What is it about Linux that makes it so clusterable?
Well, that's a good question. Hopefully I can actually get this guy back. Here we go. So, there. The reason why I'm slow is we have about 16 nodes in a cluster that are all generating this image right now. So
Wow.
each one of them is building a part on POV RAM. It's generating a piece of this image.
Okay.
Similar to the way that Pixar would have a cluster to build, Finding Nemo 2 or whatever. The same general idea. You have a lot of different servers working together on a similar job to produce something. So what makes it clusterable is a couple things. One, what we talked about earlier, the ability to sort of strip out a lot of the pieces from the operating system to have it do one task very well. And also the ability to have a cloned system across multiple types of servers that can intercommunicate very well. So this particular distribution of Linux is called ROX, and someone took the Red Hat distribution and pieced away a bunch of the non-essential bits for clustering, and then added a bunch of cluster-specific bits like MPI libraries and different parallel libraries that help the applications work together. And so when you download ROX, it is a distribution just for clustering. Right? It can't do much else, but it works very good for clustering. So we have 16 nodes all running ROX doing this particular image right here. Yeah, so and then what we do is do benchmark tests, right? We'll test the Windows stuff and see how fast it can build that image, and then we'll test the Linux stuff and see how fast it can do it, see where we're at.
Cool. And then you tell the product team, hey, we were 2 times faster, or we were 2 times slower.
Yeah, I go and I beat up the product team, and I'll say, you need to build this faster or this,
But we have Dave Cutler on the schedule.
Yeah.
No one else does. Only one Dave Cutler.
Yeah. He's one guy I don't beat up, so. All right. So that's kind of one way we work with product teams. here you can kind of see that we run, everything from Red Hat, different types of Red Hat. We run Samba. We do lots of tests with Samba. We're actually, quite honestly, we're fairly conversant with the Samba development team around different things, Windows and Linux and all the WebSphere we run the entire lab here. Probably one of the more interesting parts is, so everything here is Linux or open source based, and we're in obviously a very Microsoft environment.
Yes.
So we have to run our own DNS, our own DHCP. We have to run our own web servers. So everything here is our own. So all of our networking and everything is our own. Basically, from corporate, all we get is that little piece of fiber coming in, and we're responsible for the rest. But it's good because that's how a real customer environment looks, right? Where you have all of those things being done on your own. It does make it interesting, though, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, how do we authenticate against Active Directory from our Linux machines?
Exactly.
Or how do we, use IPsec trying to go to MS Web internally to see our intranet? So we come across a lot of problems that customers see in mixed environments really early, right? Because we are in the most Microsoft environment, probably on the planet,
Exactly.
with a lot of non-Microsoft stuff. Mm-hmm. So when we bring a product in here like SMS to test it, this is truly the wilds, right? So we have down here, we have a bunch of Sun Gear, some IBM P-Series, so this is running AIX, this is running Solaris. We have FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, 30 different distributions of Linux, and even some stuff that we put together on our own. So when you bring a product into this environment, it doesn't get more freaky than this in terms of what potentially could go wrong with your product in a mixed environment. So we see a lot of things early for the product teams. Let's see.
We got a Linux UK3, 64, huh?
Yeah, so we're doing some 64-bit testing between SUSE 64-bit and our release 64-bit here.
All right.
Here this is a rack of machines we just finished a reliability test on between Windows and Linux to look at how do you keep a system reliable. Some Solaris, Gen 2, we run quite a bit of Gen 2 Linux, it's a popular distribution.
Okay.
This right here is what you saw over there, the high-performance computing system. We actually use Blades for our high-performance computing cluster for this particular test. And so this one here, the one it's plugged into, is the one that you saw the display on of that image.
All right. Wow. So what are some of the things that you've learned? That's a kind of a vague question, but specifically with reliability. Windows servers is a very reliable operating system. Our server.
Yeah.
So what is it that what's your opinion?
Just talking about reliability, in that recent test, the sort of key learnings are not so much do you stick it in and does it run for 6 years straight. Mm-hmm. What we found is reliability is largely determined by how people keep the system reliable. So the things that people do to keep the system up. So patching it, right? So if you patch a system, what else breaks, and how long does it take you to fix those breakages until the system comes back up? So on this rack of machines, we'd have a stopwatch, and we would introduce failure points into here. So we would, for example, we'd go and just pop open a drive and take it out. Mm-hmm. And then we'd have an admin come in and say, okay, figure out what the problem was. And that one's pretty easy because you can see a drive's missing. But maybe we did something else to it. Like we had little applications that would write constantly to the log file and take up all the disk, or suck all the memory, or CPU logs that would spike the CPU. And how long it took the admin to get that machine back to a serviceable state. So we'd have clients talking to it, and as soon as it got pegged by CPU, the clients couldn't communicate anymore with it. Mm-hmm. And then how long it took them to get it back. So we ended up finding that there's pros and cons to both sides, right? Like all things. We found that one of the challenges on the Linux side is you have what we call whack-a-mole, where you upgrade one RPM or one package, and that can cause a tree of dependency breakages on other packages that you have to then go isolate and find out what happens. You have this combinatorial thing where one might change the other as you go down the pipe. Microsoft does a pretty good job around dependency resolution down the pipe. So if you have something that causes a dependency problem and you go to get an update, that update is typically resolved in such a way that most of those dependencies are going to be fixed when you bring it down. Very rarely do you do a Windows update and all of a sudden you have 50 other things that just spew back low-level errors saying libxml needs to be upgraded to version 1.x.4.7, right?
Yeah.
Because you just upgraded some other package for, your web server. And that's because we do a lot of formal testing, right? Test things here pretty formally. The open source space, there's a lot of it's quick, it moves very quickly, but testing isn't as consistent as it is in our environment. So when you have that problem, your clock ticks longer when you're chasing dependencies. So our reliability test came out in some cases much better on the Windows side than on the Red Hat side. But in other cases, it went a bit of the other way too.
Sure.
So what we do is we take that and then we go back to the product teams and say, maybe the size of the patch that we're sending down is too big. Maybe we could break up the patch into smaller pieces, or maybe there's a different compression algorithm we can use to make that patch more efficient coming down from Windows Update. Or maybe that you just pop up a little balloon in the taskbar to say, by the way, some idiot just pulled the hard drive out, right? So you don't have to go figure that out, right?
Yep.
So kind of instrumenting the system so that it's a little bit more responsive or intelligent to things around reliability.
That's really excellent. It's fantastic. So we're learning from the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, competition makes everyone get better.
I believe it.
It really does. And it's not just the technology that we look at. We also very closely look at the community model. How does a community model work? Where doesn't a community model work?
Yeah.
Like what are the breakpoints? How big does the software get when the community model doesn't work anymore, or how complicated that type of thing?
Fantastic. Well, this is incredibly fascinating.
And we also get a bunch of the old gear that's lying around the campus too. So, like when people are, I think this came from the services for Unix guys were done, I think, with the Unix gear, and they know that we can use it.
Totally. Okay. We're almost done with tape? 1 minute of tape? Thank you again.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It really was.
Fantastic.